grandfather was always thinking of this community, he and Grandmother Ball both. I just felt it was my obligation and my pleasure to create something and continue what my grandparents had started.
DOMA is an amazing facility, the David Owsley Museum of Art. I love the fact that it comes out as DOMA because it puts me in mind of much more well-known institutions nationally that have MoMA as their acronym. But it really fits, and DOMA is so important to this community, and I don't know that the community always realizes what they have.
How did Muncie get to have a museum like that? Because I'm from Lafayette. Very similar communities, industrial base. Then I think they started about the same time. You know, they're historically about the same age, I believe. And while Lafayette has a very nice art center, it is quite smaller than what we have here at Ball State. This is an incredible collection. I'm like a cheerleader for it because there's no sign out on I-69 to say, you're missing a great art museum here.
I've focused on this museum and on the Dallas Museum there because those are my two main homes. This was when we lived in Europe when I was a child. My mother and I would quite often come back and stay at Minnetrista, my grandparents' house there on Minnetrista Boulevard, where the Minnetrista Cultural Center is now there. And that was home. You see, for all those years when we lived abroad, I never thought that Romania or Ireland or Denmark really was home there. But Muncie, with my grandparents, was home. And then I went to Burris High School in 1942 to 3 before I went away to Andover. And I had been at Park School in Indianapolis before that for 3 years there. So Indiana was pretty much home for us until my parents moved back in 1945 and reopened my mother's house in Dallas there. But I was always away, either at college or in the Air Force. And then I moved to New York in 1955. So I never really lived in Dallas. So Muncie was home.
Without a doubt, the Owsley Museum is by far the most superior museum I've ever been associated with on a university campus. Many of the campuses I've been with have very nice museums. Many times they have reflected a regional flavor, a long-time collection of local curators and artists. In Maine, a very strong identity with Native American culture. At the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, a strong association with Southwest culture. And even in Southern Illinois, a very strong Midwestern historical, even Native American touch. But the Owsley Museum is by far the broadest and deepest collection of art that I've ever been experienced with.
What I'm trying to do is show how this museum is very much Muncie's gateway to the world of art, as well as Ball State University's connector with other museums and other university museums. This is a place that is absolutely free. It's a wonderful environment with beautiful decoration. We have programs like meditation in the museum, so one can find their center and space here. Final Fridays and First Fridays and Community Day, which was like a family day, in which the museum was literally packed with families and their children. And we had storytelling events, artist demonstrations, all types of interactive programming for the children and the parents.
Well, as Director of Education, I would say that I am supposed to be looking at the big picture of how learning happens here at the museum. So thinking in terms of how our different audiences, our adult groups, which of course students are the greatest, schools, families, they are all experiencing the museum in different ways through our programming, through our activities. Those include tours, they include takeaways, things they can pick up. And so it's developing those products, it's developing those services so that ideally every visitor who walks in the door is having an optimal experience.
The museum is evidence of the commitment and fondness that we have for the place that we live, and has a great influence on the value that we place on the city that we live in and the university.
It's an honor really to be a part of this museum. We have wonderful people, volunteers who make it happen, a great staff, and all those things come together to elevate the importance of visual art in this part of the state of Indiana, and indeed in the whole state.
Well, from the beginning of the Ball Industries, they were very concerned with building community, and arts patronage was part of that. And so the Ball brothers, particularly Frank Ball, E.B. Ball, and George Ball, were very keen to build the community. And Ball State University, of course, is a large part of that community building. But the art collection that they developed and placed here at the Ball State Teachers College at the time also was a great expression of the importance that they placed on giving the community a quality of life and a sense of the place where they lived.
Of course, it was nearly empty when it first opened. That's why Nana and Grandfather went out to the Grand Central Galleries, as I recall, in New York, and bought a lot of that sculpture that's in Sculpture Court now to help fill up the museum. Because Grandfather's collection was mostly American and European paintings there. And of course, I've been adding some contemporary paintings because naturally, since he died in 1943 and she in 45, they didn't collect any abstract expressionist pictures or anything later.
So there's a definite connection there, family connection, with this patronage between David Owsley's grandfather, Frank Ball, and David Owsley himself.
David, of course, member of the Ball family through his mother, Lucy. He's the grandson of Frank C. Ball.
She encouraged me in everything I ever did, whereas my father was opposed to be an art as a career. My father didn't think that art was a viable career. He said art is something to have for once you've made your fortune. Until he saw that picture of me with Queen Elizabeth of England, and that changed his viewpoint.
David Owsley is single-handedly responsible for about 3,000 works of art that have been placed here. And so it's very difficult to put your finger on exactly one or two major contributions that would define what he's doing.
David Owsley's contribution, the answer to that is both a simple and a complex one, because simply he's the largest single donor the museum has ever had. The complex answer is he has given very intentional and eclectic gifts, ranging from pre-Columbian to the Krasner that we have. And that's somewhat unusual for a donor, I think, to have that kind of eclectic ability to find quality in so many areas, and David certainly has done that over the years.
In this transformation from a essentially American and European fine art collection to one that covers all the decorative arts, etc., that's very much David Owsley's doing. If you walk into any gallery here, you will see a number of credit lines on the labels. I love to point out the labels to visitors and say, read the credit lines. A large percentage of the credit lines will say, gift of David Owsley, gift of his Alconda Owsley Foundation, or David will give things in honor of someone, but from him. So in honor of his mother, or in honor of important people at the university. So he's been very generous that way, and if you walk through the galleries, you can see that generosity. And in some of the galleries, like the African Art Gallery or the Asian Art Gallery, you'll see that the majority of the labels say David Owsley on them. He's given almost every object in that gallery. So he's really filled out the collection and turned it into a world art museum. David Owsley has a very deep and wide knowledge of art. As I said, he started out in Europe as a child, visiting the great collections, etc. But then he, later in his life, decided that he wanted to have professional training. And he went to the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. And David became a professional curator.
At lunchtime, I used to go to the Art Institute, you know, or down to the Oriental Institute on the weekends or there, or to the University of Chicago museums or the Frank Lloyd Wright houses and all. So I went back to Harvard and asked Dr. Coolidge there, how could I be a museum curator? He said, well, why would you want to be a museum curator? There you already have a profitable career. And I said, yes, but I want to be a museum curator. He said, well, if you're serious, the best teachers are at the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University, the German Jewish scholars who escaped Hitler. And you can go down and talk to Craig Smythe, who incidentally was one of the Monuments men, and ask him. When I saw Dr. Smythe, he said, well, but this is a graduate school. You don't have the undergraduate requirements to get into this school. I said, what do I have to do? He said, well, if you're serious, you can go down to Washington Square for a couple of years. And I did. And all of a sudden, my grades went to be straight A's there, whereas at Harvard, there had been C's and B's and B pluses there. But all of a sudden, I found something that turned me on, which was the history of art.
I think what's wonderful about David is he's, with his collections, you know, he's donated and he's put on loan many pieces from his personal collection and for Ball State University, and now his museum at David Owsley Museum of Art. And I think it's wonderful that, you know, through his name, through his family, he's been able to carry on and teach upcoming art historians and artists a lot about the past, because he's got so much.
He's very intentional, particularly the last 10 years, in what he has provided for the museum, because he looks at the voids or the gaps and finds the niche that he wants to cover, and then goes out and seeks that artifact and gives it to the museum. For example, we did not have a really good English 18th century painting, and he provided the Joshua Reynolds portrait of Bassett on his matriculation, and it's a marvelous piece. And so he's thinking not only what will be great pieces for the museum and museum quality, but how that collection can be used educationally. And so he provides pieces that are great representations of different genres and styles, so that he can have wonderful pieces for the faculty and students to view.
After all, Muncie is really not near enough to a great center like New York or Boston or even Chicago there, and this gives the students immediate experience with original works of art. I think that's very important.
He loves to share his knowledge. I actually attended a program he did at the museum before the expansion, and it was a lot of fun to me because it was still in slides, and the students weren't quite sure how to set up the slide projector. They were just so used, of course, to the digital projector with the laptop that they just weren't quite sure, and so some of the slides got in upside down, you know. But David was great, you know, he just worked it, and he had them 2 slides going at a time, so that was even a bit more of a challenge for them. It was warm and it was engaging, and as he can be. And I just love the fact that he loves to share his knowledge with everyone.
Every day there's teaching within the museum. That needs to be said flat out. Whether it's art history or art studio art classes, because those fields are natural sisters to the museum, but also much more diverse things like mathematics, physics, chemistry has been taught in here, aspects of it, geology with some of the stones in the artworks in the collection, and all those things can be done with the museum. They're compatible with what is going on in this building, and we can provide that training, and we can provide the proper space for students to learn, study, explore, and also practice.
When I came here, there was not an art history program. There was not an art history major, which to me seemed really odd, having this resource. So that's the first thing I did as director, is created the BA in art history, and it's growing rapidly, and so it's really exciting to have that major and have this museum growing at the same time, and having a lot of young faculty coming in the art history area, working with the new director, as well as they worked with Peter Bloom before he retired, but working together to create a program that is, that's not isolated from one another. It's a cooperative, and then finding ways to take that program into the community and out into the state, and get the word out elsewhere.
Being an art history and history major, I've spent a lot of time in this museum. It's very important to me because it opened up my eyes to all of the career opportunities that come with museums, and it ultimately led me in the path to become a museum director, hopefully in my future. So it's really kind of shaped my entire education.
I think by virtue of the size of the collection and how it's impressively installed and interpreted, there is an appreciation by students generally that this is a wonderful place to work. I think that after a little while, though, there's a recognition that it's not just a pretty place to work, that there are real career opportunities, scholarly opportunities, opportunities to make a contribution to the development of the museum in terms of its impact on visitors.
The Infinite Museum Project is an idea I dreamed up about 1.5 years ago. I wanted to reshape how people experience the art in museums, and we wanted to do something kind of different.
For our project, we're essentially making a flexible web application. It's a website that people can use on their phones or tablets. They can carry it around with them in the museum. That's the point of the application, something that they can have on hand to help them engage with the art better.
The idea that we came up with is to create a web application that people can go into, and it just gives them prompts, is what we're calling them. So it'll give you a piece of art and something to do with that piece, or something to think about, maybe a fact about that piece, an instruction, or some of them are also like general for the whole museum, like pick something in the museum and what if this was the only relic of humanity in 50,000 years? What would that say about humanity? So just like things that you could go in and think about by yourself, or that could start a conversation, or you could use with a group.
It's one thing to sit in a class and listen to a lecture, but not everyone can learn that way. And the David Owsley Museum of Art, that's a great place to come and learn about different cultures, but a lot of people see it as more of, you just look at things on a wall. But that's not true. You can draw connections between you and what's on the wall, and we're just trying to enhance that connection.
We've been very lucky to have David Owsley provide all the wonderful art objects in this museum. And he came and met with us during the semester, and we talked about our research and what we were making, and he seemed delighted that we were using his collection in unique ways.
It was a big moment because I've heard his name, I have seen pictures, and I know the history behind him and his family. So getting to meet him was a really great experience. He's a very nice man, and hearing him talk about the works of art that he's donated was really inspiring. It made me want to be him, essentially, to strive to collect art and start young. He said he started very young collecting art, and that gave me a boost of confidence, knowing that you can start low and work your way up and collect things like he has. I'm very happy that the museum has someone like him to donate to their institution.
David Owsley's donations have been fundamental in changing the museum, and they just keep coming in. His generosity knows no bounds here. And whenever a package comes in, usually I know about it well ahead. I've vetted the work in some way or another and done some basic research on it.
Bob is a very thorough researcher. there when I ask him, what he thinks about a work of art that I ask if it would be an important addition here. He really digs in and finds out a lot about it and informs me.
Recently, we had the opportunity to unpack several gifts from Mr. Owsley. The particular one, though, that captivated me most specifically was something that's actually a loan. It's not yet a gift to the museum, but it is on view. It's in the pre-Columbian area, and it's the Olmec serpentine sculpture. When I look at that figure, I find it to be transportive.
Well, this new Olmec figure of a shaman there will explain this culture, and we're talking about 1000 BC to 300 BC at La Ventana there, which is an area of the Olmec north of today's town of Veracruz in Mexico there, and it opens up that culture. We're talking about 3,000 years ago. Even then they were influenced by these hallucinogenic herbs or plants there and put into a trance. Just as the Delphic Oracle was influenced by gaseous emissions there and brings on these predictions and contributes to their mystique.
And in the gallery, it looks totally different from where it was unpacked in the basement. The light shines on it. You see the way that that serpentine sort of has some movement to it too. And so I think part of the reason why it's captivating for me is I look at it and I think, when this was in a flickering light or used in some sort of spiritual sense, it must have had almost a kind of living aspect to it. And I think that's a case of where you can be easily surprised. You can be surprised at how surprised you are, having worked in museums for several years, to still have that great moment of love, enjoyment, appreciation, and ultimately to be transported when you look at something like that. I wanted, when I saw that, to go back in time. I wanted to see how that was used, when it was made. I also, looking at it, thought, we need to get this on view right away because I can see how visitors would also find this particularly interesting and be able to look at it from multiple access points and really do that kind of close looking, that kind of deep looking that we want them to be able to do to gain a genuine appreciation of that unique work of art.
Well, one of the most magnificent things that has arrived here in the past year is the head of a Chinese Sung Dynasty Bodhisattva. And this is a pink sandstone sculpture, simply a head, but it's about 4 times life size, and originally would have been carved out of live rock on the side of a mountain in southwestern China. This head arrived here in a very large crate that we could barely get through the door. It was tremendous, and we knew exactly where it was going to go at the end of a long vista that could be seen from outside the museum in the corridor there, which would beckon people in. It's a really important thing. David Owsley is very fond, I think, of the bodhisattvas that he has sent here. We currently have about 12 of them on view. Bodhisattvas are mythological characters who have achieved enlightenment but have decided to remain on earth to help other people. And sometimes I think of David Owsley himself as a bodhisattva because he has remained here and made it sort of his own mission to help us become enlightened in a certain way.
I hope I'm remembered as an enabler there, where I've helped through not only gifts of work of art, but through endowment there for professorships and curatorial travel and scholarships for students there to open up the doors of the world of art.